our political commentators today. Gareth Hughes and Tim Hurdle. Kia ora koroa, welcome.
Good morning.
Morena.
Gareth's the director of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Aotearoa, former Green MP, no longer a member of any political party. Tim is a former national senior advisor, consultant and director for several companies. He's currently the campaign director for Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown. Well, the voters' mood remains not great by any number of measures and surveys of late, confidence surveys, etc., of household and business expectations. Let's look at how this is playing out in national politics. And Tim, your theme for the day is that all politics is retail. If so, how is it going at the moment for the incumbent government? Can you elaborate?
Well, I just think often in politics we like to think that it's high-minded discussions about the UN Security Council or latest movements in economic data, but in reality, most people view the economic situation through their own back pocket and what the value for money they get at the supermarket and how safe they feel about their job, and often that comes down to what they can afford to buy at the supermarket. And I think anybody who's wandered around one of those on a daily basis would tell you things seem pretty expensive and money seems to not go as far as it used to. So I think that kind of is reflected in the political situation where the government is feeling the effects of that cost of living argument as it gets narrowed down to, but also that kind of wealth effect of people not feeling that they have the money they used to have.
It really reflects what's coming in, not only in business sentiment, but particularly in the voter sentiment, and we'll talk about the Ipsos poll in a moment. But when you look at this through the political lens then, has the government overpromised? And has it raised expectations too much? Do you want to run through some of the things that you see are still hip pocket factors or indeed are failing to show yet as progress, Tim?
Yeah, I think in the 2023 election, the very strong branding for the National Party was get the country back on track. And the promise to the electorate was that the economy would fire up. It had been quite a volatile period through COVID, through loose monetary policy, heavy spending. There was an element that they were going to tidy up the finances. But I guess there's kind of a challenge that the economy sort of started recovering and then sort of seems to have stalled a wee bit. And there hasn't been the feeling that the flow-throughs come through that normally would be expected from higher house prices, or which has been the traditional way that people have felt a bit better off. I guess that has impacted on people's spending, and there are things like tax cuts which were delivered but don't seem to have had a big impact. And so I guess there's a real feeling in the public of, well, when is this promise going to be delivered on? And that's becomes the political challenge for the government to prove that it has been delivering on what it said it would do.
Gareth, this is one of the longest recessions or recession-like periods that I can recall, and they go back a way. And again, now that we see some of these low interest rates coming through, we're seeing them in the first instance eaten up by some of the insurance, rates hikes on households in some of the food staples. And also we're seeing people paying down debt, paying down their mortgages faster, holding on and saving more. But come back to that point about whether the government has oversold its role in being able to fix any, let alone all of this. Is that kind of what they're reaping at the moment?
Oh, well, that's right, exactly. This is the worst recession in my lifetime, and the government went to the public after COVID on a platform of inflation, crime, housing, the economy. You look at all those areas, they're going backwards, and that's actually reflected in the Ipsos polling that shows the government's going backwards on the very things they were campaigning on. They talked about cost of living, but you're right, people are holding on to cash. Bernard Hickey has some very interesting data showing the amount of term deposits is actually growing at a very large rate. So we talk about a two-speed recovery when it comes to the rural versus metropolitan city economies. We also see a bit of a two-speed experience of the cost of living crisis. It's those people whose wages have been going backwards with inflation that spend more of a share of their wages on food, on electricity, the non-discretionary factors of their spending. Those are the things that are going up alongside massive rates increases as well. So some people are paying down cash, some people are increasing their savings, other people are going deeper into debt. going backwards. And this is the problem for the government, is they oversold it, said they would be able to sort out these problems, and in fact they're not. When you look at the Ipsos polling, National's perceived ability to handle the cost of living crisis, which 6 in 10 Kiwis say is the most important issue facing the country, that's now dropped 5 points to 26%. Labor's now at 33%. So the voters are looking at Labor, who did do some tangible things, half-price bus fares, etc., which really did make a difference to back pocket.
I'm interested in your take on this, Tim. The Prime Minister's response to this is, look, it was Labor that made all these problems. We're the ones cleaning up. But he doesn't seem to be winning that narrative battle, not according to this latest survey.
Yeah, I do wonder if they have to sort of focus on their own agenda a bit more and talk about what they are doing. I think the Ipsos poll can be overinterpreted because it's more of a reflection of a weakness of a government, because you can't say that Labor's out there with any policies right now, let alone any policies or prescriptions or alternative policies.
You just said all politics is retail.
Yeah, but then
perception matters,
Yeah, but they haven't come up. You have to come up with the solutions, so you're going to have to come up with an alternative, and it is hitting people. People are feeling it. They're not necessarily going to see an alternative from Labor just yet, are they?
Maybe next year that's the issue for that.
Well,
right? Maybe
if you're not testing your policies right now, you can have some real problems next year when you come out and people say, "Is that it?"
On that question of raising expectations, though, Tim, on Morning Report last week, the Finance Minister raising expectations again about supermarkets. Did the actual announcement underwhelm? Are there too many little announcements when people go, well, so what?
Well, there's a point where you've got to try and tweak it. It's quite a big call to go and break up the duopoly of supermarkets in New Zealand. And a very complicated microeconomic reform. So to do that would involve changing people's property rights and quite significant investments, and you'd have to be very confident that was going to work. So I guess it's a question of how far can you go without that it's effective. But this is a problem with any of these major interventions, is how do you calibrate it in such a way it has an impact without causing chaos.
All right, your take on the supermarkets announcement, Gareth?
Well, woefully ineffective. I mean, Smart Communications calling it an express lane, but this is not going to reduce the cost for Kiwis next week, next month, not even next year. Food prices have gone up 5% in the last 12 months. That's higher than inflation. And I think, this is one of the biggest issues facing our economic health going forward, is the oligopolies in building construction, supermarkets, electricity, and the rent-seeking behaviour that limits productivity growth, that keeps prices
They're not new issues, though. And to Tim's point, Labor didn't do anything about it when they were in power with an absolute majority. So
it's a fair critique of the government. But remember, on supermarkets, this was the issue that Nicola Willis made as the defining first speech of the year with the Going for Growth presentation. I was there at Waikato University at the Economics Forum. She made this the major focus, and she's not delivering concrete, practical policies that would make a difference. This is all trifling on the margin sort of stuff. It's good, it's needed, should have been done. But the fact of the matter is the government probably couldn't actually get agreement internally whether they should be breaking up, which would be the easiest, the most fastest practical way to actually get a third competitor, through to actually underwriting them. There's no guarantees they actually have agreement internally that they can see this term.
The reversal of or liberalisation of recent changes to the likes of alcohol laws, and we've seen it with other recreational products in inverted commas as well. Who are the winners here and why? Tim, again, is this a case we've seen some of the smaller parties really able to advance their agendas a heck of a lot quicker than the biggest? Yeah,
I think the alcohol is always it's tied up in a whole heap of issues around. The ACT Party often have very liberal views. New Zealand First have very strong social conservative views. And then you have the challenge of trying to mitigate public harm, but also not reduce free choice. So those issues are always so complicated. The politics of that is just very hard to unwind and understand, I think.
It's also small business as well, though, isn't it?
It's a lot of small business owners, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Who's winning the policy battle here, Gareth?
Well, I think when you look at, say, Nicole McKee, who made the announcement around alcohol policy changes, she's readily positioning herself as the Minister for Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. It's, I think, a populist step, what she's taking, but it's a real disjunction with the government's tough on crime policy. So here's the minister announcing a weakening of alcohol policies, the licensing changes which had been expected in previous leaked papers haven't flown through that could have saved 2,400 violent crimes a year. The government's making it effectively easier to access alcohol. Officials are advising it's going to have an increase in crime. But here's the minister who announces the policy changes literally at a venue that allows bottomless brunches. I think it tells you everything you need to know about the direction of this policy. And I think it's New Zealand First being incredibly populist, not looking at the evidence. And there's a real mismatch between the tough on crime but soft on the causes of crime rhetoric from the government.
Just this ongoing battle also over the US tariffs. Again, you mentioned earlier about politics being retail, Tim. This is one of those issues that for many people sounds quite dry, but the impacts as they flow through, if they flow through, are very significant. And sometimes it's more the micro than the macro. We heard this morning just from another New Zealand sector, it's the value-added wood sector that's worried it's about to get slapped with a tariff after a review of some section of something in the United States. And its point is this: the US is a big customer. The tariffs come in, that customer's gone. Canada's also impacted. Not easy to pivot to a different market to try and pick up the losses. And we've already had mills closing, pulp and paper and so forth. Are we starting to see the micro effects of this policy? And and is there anything the government can do? That they're virtually pleading. They seem to be throwing the new purchase of the military equipment we're getting from the States into the mix. But can they do anything other than just make pleas to a rather large, enormous operation?
We've entered a new era. We've gone away from the free trade era now. We one of the reasons our beef prices are so high is because the impact on the US beef market of some of these tariff changes and impacts on what the Chinese can buy and what the Brazilians can sell, and it's moving everything around the market. It's no longer going to the market that will give you the best price, but that's been distorted by tariffs. Then you have situations of the growth of the economy and where and who can actually sell where will now be impacted on this. To your point around the military equipment, we went out of our way to buy 2 Airbus aircraft, which are European, but the Chinese deliberately bought 500 Boeing aircraft to clearly curry favour with Washington.
Well, also it's the trade imbalance is seen to be the crude metric that's being used.
That's right. And when we buy Boeing aircraft, generally it moves our trade balance into the Americans' favour if you're going to use that crude, which is a silly metric, but that seems to be what the US government uses to judge people's trade policies. This old-fashioned mercantilism.
Gareth, is this the government's reality? It did not know that the tariffs were coming. Nobody did when it made all sorts of promises about all sorts of things. And however much we try and talk it up and talk about, shifting opportunities or perhaps ours are going to be worse than someone else's, are we starting to see it really hit home?
Oh, it really is hitting home, and this is a headwind. It's the last thing we need. But, I'd be a wealthy man if I could predict what Trump's doing, and it's not the government's fault they couldn't predict it. But I think where the political sin is they looked flat-footed when it came out. They looked like it was all belated actions, that we hadn't really been prepared for it. We definitely didn't have the communications what would happen in this scenario. So the government's looked flat-footed on this. Minister Peters looked a bit flat-footed on the Cook Islands as well. He's off fighting culture wars all over the show. Is he dedicated and focused on what is the most sensitive geopolitical time? Who's generally been a very good foreign minister for New Zealand. But, buying helicopters and airplanes, increasing defence spending, opening an FBI office in Wellington, these are all steps which aren't actually helping with the relationship tangibly. It's unfair, the tariffs that we're facing. But the root of the problem is we're not really responding in a way that's going to improve our resiliency or diversification. We're going back to the old spigots that we're opening up when it comes to population, tourism, housing. These aren't the futures for a more resilient, productive economy.
I think it's a bit unfair to blame the government because it is complex, but I think New Zealand diplomats are going to have to become more aware of the changing geopolitical system now. We've traditionally been in favour of fair rules and free trade. We've moved to a new era where you have to curry favour with the administration to get very far. Other countries are probably more adept and have moved faster towards playing in that space, and that also applies to the Chinese and other major geopolitical powers. And this is where we're entering a new realm of how decisions are made around how you trade with the world are no longer going to be protected by what we envisaged through the World Trade Organization, but now are in a more Wild West kind of old-fashioned style of who you can curry favour with will give you an advantage. And the Australians are you can watch the Australians changing their game plan now to try and very much get more in favour with the Americans, because that's their path.
On that question of opening up the spigot, the usual spigot, Gareth, I'm really interested on how Labour, how the Greens, how the left will approach this, because there is clearly emerging a two-speed economy. The regions that are benefiting from flow-on effects from strong primary products, not just dairy prices, but also lamb and meat, which have been suffering for so long. It's such a paradox. It's hurting like hell in the supermarket, and as part of the cost of living crisis, it's also driving returns into those regions that are doing so much better than the big metros of Auckland and Wellington. So how will the left approach this conversation when we get into the gnarly of economics and economic policy and debate?
Well, full credit to the Greens. They have released their fiscal approach. People are calling it radical and extremist when it's a pretty marginal, I think 6% of debt, slightly higher than the other parties. So, there's a bit of hyperventilation over this policy. So clearly the Greens have targeted some areas where they would invest some more. I think when you look at Labour, they're pointing out the fact that the government facing the steepest recession, partly engineered by the Reserve Bank, has acted counter-cyclically. They've pulled back investment into areas like construction, infrastructure, the Kāinga Ora housing, which so many builders were dependent on. Normally governments invest more in recessionary environments like this to tide us over, to keep the workers in the country until conditions improve, and that's when you start paying down debt like Michael Cullen did. So it's a legitimate criticism of the Labour Party at the moment. I think they've only got 6 policies they've actually committed to. Was a feature in the Sunday Star Times over the weekend. Everything from live animal exports to a few other policies. But I want to pick up on a point that Tim made earlier. There is something about being match fit for political parties when you're launching policies outside of the white hot heat of the election campaign. I would be urging Labour to start rolling out some policies. You need to get your processes, your team, your communications all good to go. When they do start rolling out policies, we don't know how match fit Labour will be or how receptive the public will be to the way they're pitching them.
And again, that question of the double-edged sword of high prices for the primary sector, which is both driving a recovery in the regions and hurting like hell in the supermarket. Tim, I mean, that's a pretty nuanced narrative that's got to come out of the government.
Yeah, it is a complicated picture to sell. Just picking up on Gareth's point around migration, net migration's actually fallen away quite significantly.
It's just about flat, basically.
Just about flat, and I think that's part. I think the hidden story is how much house prices not moving in the flat building market and the flat house market is impacting on the middle class or the middle New Zealand view of their wealth, and that's pushing people to hold back that cash. And as Gareth said, people are putting money in term deposits rather than spilling it out there, and that in itself is holding the economy back. So it'll be interesting if there's some stability, confidence returns, how quickly the economy roars away. So it could be very interesting as we get out of the cold winter and people start getting to summer and say, actually, it's maybe not that bad, how quickly the economy picks up, because there's going to be a lot of people getting big cheques from Fonterra out of the sale of the retail brands. And I'm pretty sure that I'd love to be a Ford dealer in a rural town, because there's going to be a lot of Ranger Utes picked up very shortly.
Very interesting. The constraints on the economy when that happens is a story for another day. The number of tradies who can't finish their apprenticeships at the moment. And I was just reading engineering students at Canterbury at the moment who can't get placements to finish their 800 hours of practical. So there's going to be headaches, but at the moment I think people would take that recovery, take that headache. Mm-hmm. Let's touch on a couple of big matters still to come. The Tamaki Makaurau by-election this weekend. Early voting is underway. Beyond the constituents of that seat, what's the bigger picture here for Te Pāti Māori, for Labour, the two key contestants? What are you looking for, Gareth?
Oh, I'm looking to see what the vote is. Obviously it was so close last time with only 42 votes. Where are the voters going to go? This is a significant area for Māori, for the Māori economy. Really, it's a battle for Māori representation. Whose approach resonates the most? Is it the more mainstream incrementalist approach represented by Penny and Labour, or the more sort of activist approach, pushing the boundaries of Te Pāti Māori? Labour's been building. The last election, Labour was on a real hiding to nothing after the COVID years, and now we, however, see Te Pāti Māori resurgent. Much of the Toitu Tiriti movement, the biggest protest probably in our country's history, came about because of their agenda driving and their ability to genuinely mobilise. It's a real difficulty. I was up in Auckland last week, and the local government elections are happening at the same time. It's hard to see either by-election billboards in the sea of other hoardings out there. I understand Labour's going all out. The whole caucus is out there door knocking, putting a big push. The debate has been quite respectful. It was quite interesting, the tone over Q&A in the debate over the weekend, with Orini saying that her rival Penny would be the best suited for Prime Minister. We've seen some sideshows like the gang patch issue, but at its heart, it's the future for which direction Māori politics is going down.
And your take on it, Tim?
Oh, I think the turnout will be so low. It's quite a unique electorate, even for a Maori electorate. So I'm not sure you'll be able to read a huge amount out of it, other than the points that Gareth's making around the bit of a referendum about what approach is going to resonate most with engaged Maori voters.
Just finally, the 4-year term referendum proposal, the Select Committee reported back on it, I think rejecting ACT's proposed modifications. Where do things go from here? How do each of you view the idea of a 4-year term? Gareth.
Well, I should disclose I made a submission against it because I think we need real checks and balances as a bit of a quid pro quo if we're extending the term. So
You're on the same page as ACT on that then?
Of course he is.
Well, yes and no. And I think ACT actually, ironically, has come out the winner of this because on one hand, they're pushing the agenda. So if you support a 4-year term, ACT's your champion. But also their solution for more checks and balances really is ridiculous, will be ineffective, this really complicated idea that we're going to change Select Committee proportionality membership rules, and that's actually going to be an effective check. The Select Committee was right to pick up the problem that voters at elections wouldn't know if they were voting for a 3-year term or a 4-year term under the previous proposal from ACT. So at the moment, the ball's in the government's court. We could have a referendum in 26 or 29. The Select Committee didn't express a view on that. I think the challenge in the coalition is how's the government actually going to get the votes for a referendum bill and get the budget bid in time so there's an education campaign for 2026 when ACT's opposed. For me, the key thing is you need to have much more effective checks and balances if we're extending the term. We're already one of the most party-dominated parliaments in the world. We don't have the strong judiciaries, the upper house, like many other countries have as checks and balances. So the risk for the government is it looks a bit like the flag referendum, where it looked like a passion project of politicians that no real public demand, and in the end, like the previous last 2 times where the public have rejected extending the term to 4 years, it could get rejected once again a 3rd time by the public, just like the flag referendum.
You a fan or not, Tim?
Oh, I in summary, no, because I think we don't have an upper house and we have a very powerful central government in New Zealand. I think if you're good enough, go back to the polls and tell them why you need another term as the system of democracy, and it works quite well. And as Gareth says, every time it's ever asked, people dig into it, they pretty quickly decide it's not necessarily a great idea. And I think we've seen a lot of governments overseas that get to 4 years and are very roundly rejected. We have a MMP system here which gives a diversity of thought and it creates a bit of a balance, which is, I think, what you need in a 3-year term.
Thanks both. Tim Hurdle, Gareth Hughes.